Breaking news, there's been a large creative shake-up in the WWE just announced within the last 20 minutes or so. WWE has released a statement saying, quote, "In an effort to streamline our creative writing process for television, we have consolidated both teams from Raw and SmackDown into one group, led by Bruce Prichard. Paul Heyman will concentrate on his role as an in-ring performer." End quote. First of all, in-ring performer, does that mean Paul Heyman's getting a push for the Universal Championship? Of course, I joke. So, Heyman is out and Bruce Prichard is in, even though he was in. But Paul Heyman is still going to be an on-screen performer. Basically, reading between the lines, what that says is they weren't happy with Paul Heyman, but Heyman, obviously, if Brock's going to be under contract, so is Paul Heyman, so Heyman's sticking around. Didn't see that coming at all. I was under the impression that all the people backstage and the higher-ups were very happy with Paul Heyman and his performance as executive director of Monday Night Raw. Lord knows it's not an easy job at all to try and run that ship creatively, filling 3 hours of television every single week. I'm shocked, really. I'm really at a loss for words, really, for it. In terms of the Raw side of things, I worry about guys like Murphy, like Aleister Black, like Austin Theory, like Angel Garza, etc., who have, over the last 6 to 9 months, have been getting regular shots on Monday Night Raw, and we've certainly seen their careers grow because of it. We've certainly seen theirs flower blossom under the tutelage of Paul Heyman on Monday Night Raw. You've had people like Aleister Black come out and openly say Paul Heyman's been the driving force for their recent improvements and pushes over on the Red brand. So I'm concerned about if they'll get shots under Bruce Prichard. That's my initial reaction there. Personally, of course, if you're going to go with the decision to consolidate both creative teams into one, I'd much rather have Paul Heyman do that job, but obviously they're not going with that. I think something that has to be discussed about this change as well is ratings. Now, ratings for WWE in general have been on the slide for a long time. Every week we put out a post on Twitter and all of our social media platforms about the ratings for that week, as well as the ratings since, you remember WWE's premiere week? It was around September, end of September, start of October last year. It was when Raw had premiered on the USA Network and SmackDown made its debut on Fox. And it was that week as well that NXT made its debut on the USA Network. So we've been tracking the ratings ever since then. And the ratings have just slowly decreased for every brand, really. And obviously there's a lot of external factors that go into that. Obviously with the world and having no fans and being at the Performance Center and all of that stuff. But Raw, just in general, has been slowly dying a slow death for a very long time. This precedes Paul Heyman being the executive director of Monday Night Raw. Raw has been dying in the ratings for a long, long time. It's been hemorrhaging viewers. And recently, the last 3 or 4 weeks, Raw has averaged 1.7 million viewers, which is astounding, to be honest, when you think back to, and I hate to go when you go back and look at the Attitude Era, etc., but you have to. That's its peak in terms of ratings for Monday Night Raw. If you go back to the Attitude Era, if you go back to the This Is Your Life segment, that segment was viewed by, I believe, over 10 million viewers. Now, Monday Night Raw on a Monday for 3 hours can barely average 1.7 million viewers. It's astounding. And ratings, I think, have to play a factor into this. Obviously, what they're doing at the moment is not working creatively because they can't hold the viewers. I'm not necessarily sure the creative is the problem here. That's why Raw can't hold viewers every single week. I think the fact that you have a weekly 3-hour broadcast every Monday night is probably the problem why people can't tune in for 3 hours, because you just can't. It's the product is never going to be good enough to hold you for 3 hours. It just isn't. You know, and I know WWE likes to compare themselves to the NFL or NBA or other sports, leagues that will go on for 3 hours, but they're just not. They're not like that. And then it's funny because they like to compare themselves to the NFL when it suits their narrative. So when it comes to viewership, they go, oh, we're like the NFL. So we're wrestling's NFL. So why shouldn't they tune into us for 3 hours? But then at the same time, they don't want to be considered a sport. They want to be considered entertainment, and they're an entertainment show. They're a TV show. So in reality, a 3-hour show is essentially a feature-length film. Are you really going to watch a feature-length film every Monday night with the same cast and characters? No, no, it doesn't make any sense logically at all. That's like me saying I'm going to watch even the Marvel films, which are the highest grossing films of all time now. Do you really think if they came out with a new one every single Monday that was 3 hours, eventually people would get bored of it? And that's just what it is of Monday Night Raw now. That's what it is. People are bored of it, and especially when you're booking things and that you make the show missable. You have rematches all the time. It's not must-see television. That's why people don't watch it. So yeah, maybe there is a creative element that needs to be fixed there. But I think the larger problem with Monday Night Raw is the runtime. That's always been the problem ever since it became a 3-hour show back in 2012. It's always been the problem. So, of course, ratings have to play a factor into this. Now, they're not much better on SmackDown. SmackDown before the pandemic was around a 2.5 million mark every week. Now they're down to a 2 million. Some weeks recently they've been below that. They've been around 1.9 million. And of course this is live viewership, so DVR does factor into it. Most likely they're over 2 million, obviously. And they may be closer to 3 when you include DVR every week. But still, that's not good enough for network television. You know, SmackDown, the whole point of when they moved to Fox was that they were going to be on network television. They were going to get these big ratings. They'd been paid $1 billion by Fox to bring SmackDown to Fox because WWE was a ratings draw, right? Well, at the moment, they're probably not living up to their bargain. They're really not living up to it. And to be getting under 2 million on a network television show in prime time on Friday nights doesn't look good. So I wouldn't even say the ratings are much better on SmackDown, considering when SmackDown made its debut back in October of last year, SmackDown got 4 million live viewers. 4 million. And now some weeks they get under 2. They have eroded 50% of that initial audience that decided to watch SmackDown live that week, which says a lot. Now that probably focuses more on creative, because SmackDown's still a 2-hour show, which historically has always been a good runtime for professional wrestling. So if you've eroded 50% of your viewership base over the however many months that was ago, that's not good. That sounds to me like a creative problem, which again makes you wonder, why wasn't Heyman given it on both brands? Of course, you have to speculate that would Paul Heyman want to run Raw and SmackDown? He's a busy man. He's got his outside projects. Many were surprised when he took the job in the first place because he was so removed from professional wrestling creatively at this point that, by all accounts, WWE had to convince Paul Heyman for a long, long time, and they were negotiating with him for a long, long time to even take the job in the first place. So again, to see him removed from the position so quickly, it's surprising. But I suppose it isn't surprising because this is Vince McMahon. Now, with the SmackDown and Raw creative team being consolidated and overseen by Bruce Prichard, to me this signals another step in the end of the brand split or the brand extension. Once again, the writing was on the wall. To be honest, the writing's been on the wall for the longest time when it comes to the brand split. Now, last year there was a brand split, of course. Well, let's go back a couple of steps here. So obviously, prior to the second draft we had last year, we still had a sort of brand split, and then Vince McMahon introduced the wildcard rule. The brand split basically didn't exist, or there was this really soft version of a brand split that a lot of people didn't make a lot of sense of. More Raw stars appearing on SmackDown and more SmackDown superstars were appearing on Raw. It didn't make any sense. Why they even tried to market that show as different from each other, it didn't make any sense. Then they did the draft again last year. Again, this is when SmackDown first debuted on Fox. I believe it was the third week, the third show on Fox, or it may have been the second one. They did the brand split. They did horribly in the ratings in what they wanted. They obviously, I think the ratings were okay, but from what they predicted them to be, they were not great. And they tried the brand split for a while, and then, wouldn't you know it, a few weeks ago, it's announced that the wildcard rule, it's not called the wildcard rule this time, it's got a different name, but essentially the wildcard rule was returning. Now, they teased it in the past where they said, managers, they're not exclusive to Raw and SmackDown, so managers can appear where they like. So you had Sami Zayn appearing on one episode of Raw, which was strange. But then a couple of weeks ago, the wildcard rule is back. But this time the caveat is you can appear on any brand you want 4 times in a year, which opened the door for Charlotte Flair to appear on SmackDown because they needed Charlotte Flair to draw a rating on Fox, which again says a lot about the creative. But now when you've got one creative team that's working for both shows and is overseen by Bruce Prichard, then it just makes sense that they're going to Raw is going to be an extension of SmackDown, and SmackDown's going to be an extension of Raw. It's easier for them to write television now that they're all focusing on the same shows, essentially, but that will mean that you're going to have the same roster on both shows. It's inevitable. The whole point of having a separate Raw writing team and a separate SmackDown writing team in the past was because they were separate shows. They had separate rosters, they had separate storylines, separate announcers. They were the same people roughly working behind the scenes, but because the rosters were so different from each other and they were separate, this required different people to write the show because it was impossible for one team to write a separate show for Raw and a separate show for SmackDown, which involved a completely different set of characters and different cast of characters. That's why Vince Russo left back in 1999, and that was before a brand split even existed. So for me, to have a creative team that's coming back together just signals to me that we're going to have Raw and SmackDown dissolve the brand split, and they're just going to be one continuous show again. Is that a good thing or a bad thing? Considering the amount of talent that WWE has under contract, I would worry about that, even though they got rid of quite a few recently. When things do go back to normal, I mean, if you're going to have the same people appear on both Raw and SmackDown, you're going to have 25%, 50% of people that are just going to be sitting at home. Now, WWE did that in the past, and look how that worked for them previously. And again, this goes back to my point earlier on. I worry about guys like Murphy. I worry guys about people like Aleister Black, Austin Theory, Angel Garza, Liv Morgan, Ruby Riott. Because if they're getting lost in the shuffle anyway, I think people like Ruby Riott and Liv Morgan, if they're getting lost in the shuffle now, what's it going to be like if the same people are appearing on Raw and SmackDown? You know, it doesn't make any sense. Now, we know that WWE, like most businesses, has been hit quite hard with the times that they are in at the moment. So maybe also, in addition to ratings, it's a financial decision. If you have Paul Heyman off of the creative team, and if you let go a few creative writers that were working on Raw and SmackDown and consolidate that team, you're saving on your bottom line. And we know that Vince McMahon likes to save on the bottom line, because when it comes to financial calls and quarterly statements, he wants WWE to show growth, he wants them to show revenue, he wants them to show profits. And how do you get that? Recently, he has done that by letting go of people to ensure that they make profits and not major losses. So again, financially, that's something you have to consider. And maybe that was the case with Paul Heyman. We mentioned that Paul Heyman was negotiating with WWE for a long time to get him to come on board as an executive director. Maybe that cost him a pretty penny. And taking those responsibilities away from Heyman and just being an on-screen performer, maybe that saves him a pretty penny. But this reinforces that Bruce Prichard is a Vince McMahon guy. He always has and he always will be. Now, even in the time he wasn't with the WWE, prior to all of this, when he was on his podcast, they would go back through the Dave Meltzer Wrestling Observer newsletters or the Way Keller PW Torch historical articles about what was going on at the WWE at the time. And you would hear that Bruce Prichard was mentioned in there a lot. He did have the reputation for being a yes man, for being a Vince sycophant. And now he's back. He's got a couple promotions in the space of a year. You know, originally he was an advisor, came in, then he's an executive vice president, then he's an executive director of SmackDown, now he's an executive director of both Raw and SmackDown. This guy's climbing the corporate ladder quicker than anyone ever has. That's because he's a Vince McMahon guy. Vince McMahon knows him and Vince McMahon trusts him. Now, I don't blame Bruce Prichard. Congratulations to him. You know, he's certainly going up that corporate ladder quickly, and for a guy who at one point was struggling with bankruptcy, he's been open and talking about it, and now he's at the height of WWE once again. The more things change, the more things stay the same. But I worry. And yeah, Raw isn't great. But like I mentioned, I don't think that's a creative issue. I think Raw isn't great because it's 3 hours long, and it isn't a Paul Heyman thing. It's a WWE and USA Network thing. They have to realize that in the 8 years that Raw has been 3 hours now, it has slowly eroded their audience to the point where they just can't bear to sit through a 3 hour show. It's impossible. And I know WWE is happy with the 3 hour show, and that's not going to go anywhere anytime soon, because the USA Network pays a pretty penny also for that third hour. That's the whole reason that third hour appeared there, is because USA Network wants that third hour. Because even though the ratings suck on that third hour, it attracts 1.5 million people. That's 1.5 million more people than USA would have in that third hour time slot between 10 and 11 anyway. And as far as that continues, and as far as WWE continues to get paid to produce that third hour of television, it's always going to be the case. It's always going to be the case. And like I said, that's not a Paul Heyman thing. That's a WWE and USA Network thing. And as I mentioned, SmackDown isn't doing as great anyway. You know, they're getting just over 2 million and sometimes less on network television on Fox. And you think of the creative on that show, some of those storylines on SmackDown, ever since Bruce Prichard became executive director. Now, I'm not saying every bad idea is Bruce Prichard's, but you look at those creative storylines that have been going on during that show. You've got Chad Gable dressed up as a basketball player, call himself Shorty G, because everyone takes the mick out of his height, and every second sentence is a height joke or height pun. You've got King Corbin walking around as the king after he won the King of the Ring, who then had a feud that lasted about 25 years with Roman Reigns, that's surrounded by putting dog food on each other and rubbing dog food over each other. You've now got the storyline on SmackDown of Jeff Hardy is a junkie or a recovering drug addict and alcoholic, and that he's been set up for a drunken hit and run DUI on Elias. And this is a spoiler, so if you don't want to hear this spoiler, click to a minute later. But there's now been rumoured that tomorrow night on SmackDown, we're going to have a contract signing between Jeff Hardy and Sheamus. And Sheamus is going to force Jeff Hardy to take a urine test. Yes, they are doing the same segment that Shawn Michaels and Mr. McMahon and Shane McMahon did during their feud before WrestleMania 22. And it's going to end with Jeff Hardy throwing urine on Sheamus. That's what Fox paid $1 billion for to put on network TV. Their sports-centric wrestling program is going to have someone throw a cup of piss on someone. Yeah, that's great. Whereas on Raw, I'm not saying things have been creatively perfect on Raw, far from it. I think of, Lana, Lashley, Rusev. Do I need to go into that whole storyline, that wedding? But you've also had some high spots. You've had the rise of the Monday Night Messiah, Seth Rollins, turning him from this corny babyface into this compelling heel. You've had the rise of Aleister Black. You had the great storyline between Rey and Brock Lesnar, and you had the attack on Dominic by Brock Lesnar. You've had the great build-up by Drew McIntyre versus Brock Lesnar at WrestleMania, and the whole principle of having Brock Lesnar, the Universal Champion, enter the Royal Rumble at first position. People hated it, but when the match came, it was brilliant, and it made a new star in Drew McIntyre. Would Drew McIntyre have got them that opportunity on SmackDown? Who knows? Who knows? It's difficult to say. But on SmackDown, you also had Cain Velasquez versus Brock Lesnar too. I'll leave that one to you also. So, and I go back to the original announcement as well of when Paul Heyman and Eric Bischoff were announced as executive directors of Raw and SmackDown, respectively. People were shocked because these were guys who were synonymous with creativity in professional wrestling and had changed the business in the 90s of professional wrestling, that's without a doubt. And people were excited because these were creative forces and we were going to see change in WWE that was desperately needed because the product prior to that had been god-awful. God-awful, so awful that the McMahons had to come out on television and apologise for how awful it had been. Remember that we're still in control, right? We're still in control, even though the product has got no better, and the ratings have got no better. Now, fast forward a year after the announcement that Paul Heyman and Eric Bischoff were the executive directors of Raw and SmackDown, respectively, they are both out of that position within 12 months. This was a new position that was created for each brand. Remember, this was Vince McMahon stepping back because Vince McMahon was getting older. He was relaunching the XFL. How did that go? And this was Vince McMahon saying, look, I can't manage it all, and handing off the reins to people that I trust. 1 year on, and the guy who's now in charge of creative is a historic yes man of Vince McMahon. WWE always has and always will be Vince McMahon's baby. Now, I'm not criticising that. I can't do anything about that. It's not my company. It's Vince's company. It's up to him what he wants to do. But I'm tired of people trying to suggest that things are going to change. Things are going to change in WWE. Creativity is going to change. We're going to get these new positions. Raw and SmackDown are going to be different. SmackDown is going to be sports-centric. Raw is going to be revolutionary because Paul Heyman's at the helm of Monday nights. Nothing will change as long as Vince McMahon has his fingerprints on the show, which he always has and always will. And I'm not saying remove Vince McMahon, far from it. The guy has done more for professional wrestling than anyone in the history of professional wrestling. He is the godfather of professional wrestling as we know it. But this idea that things are always going to change, things are going to be revolutionized, we're going to have creativity and all this change, it's just nonsensical at this point. and you're doomed to repeat yourself. If you look at history, it just repeats itself with WWE. And at the time when Paul Heyman and Eric Bischoff were hired, people were cynical. People were cynical, saying that nothing will change. They'll be gone in 12 months. And guess what? They were right. So next time people are cynical about WWE, and next time someone criticizes WWE, maybe we should hear them out, because maybe they're just using their expertise from experience. Maybe that's that. And as I mentioned, Raw is dying. Raw is a dying brand. Less people watch it than ever. Every single week is a record low for the brand. Until they make drastic steps to that brand, it will never recover. Until they take away that third hour. Until they make fundamental changes to how they shoot, operate, and produce that show, it will continue to lose viewers and it will continue to die. Now, SmackDown, like I said, isn't doing much better. I think the future is a lot brighter for them just because of network television. Once they get back to being in arenas and once they get back to having fans on the show, I think they'll be okay purely because they're on network television. But we're just going to get Raw and SmackDown essentially be the same show now. They're going to be extensions of each other. Storylines are going to flow from one show to the next. And that's it. And Bruce Prichard, once again, the crafty son of a gun, gets another promotion, right? Bruce, he's on his third one in 2 years. Congratulations, Bruce Prichard. But what do you think of this major creative shake-up? What are your thoughts on Bruce Prichard overseeing the creative teams of both Raw and SmackDown, with Paul Heyman moving solely to an on-screen performer? Let me know in the comments section below. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Wrestle News 365 and follow us on all of our social media platforms on the screen right now. Thank you very much for watching, listening, streaming, or however you've come across this video today, and I'll speak for you again very soon. Hey guys, thank you for watching, listening, streaming, or however you come across this video today. Be sure to click on the video on the right there to watch our next video, or click the bottom there to subscribe, or the bottom right hand corner. Thank you very much, and I'll speak to you again very soon.